The courtroom was silent. 1,000 unspoken questions hung in the air as the four little girls, dressed in matching navy coats and holding hands like a single heartbeat, stepped forward to the bench. The judge leaned in gently. "Do you know why you're here today?" Emma, the tallest by just a whisper, looked up without flinching. Her voice was quiet, but unshakable. "We want to stay with our dad." The judge blinked. "Your biological uncle says he's family." Emma's tiny fingers squeezed her sister's. "He tried to sell us." The room inhaled. But it was Ava who broke the silence, stepping forward, her voice barely louder than a breath. "That man," she pointed with trembling fingers toward the back of the room, "called us merchandise." All eyes turned. Charles Wagner stood frozen, rain dripping from his coat collar, as if the storm outside had followed him in. In his hands was a crumpled check, and a photograph of his late wife. She had warned him once, "If you ever forget how to love, find the broken ones." And now 4 broken little hearts were calling him Dad. Rain crashed against the courthouse windows like fists demanding entry. Charles Wagner didn't flinch. He stood motionless at the end of the corridor, one hand still gripping the edge of the bathroom sink where he'd thrown up just moments earlier. The mirror in front of him reflected nothing he recognized. Gone was the invincible tech mogul with perfectly parted hair and sharp Armani suits. Now, just a man, unshaven, unsteady, and unsure how he got here. "Dad?" A voice called softly from the hallway. He turned quickly. Emma stood there in her coat, damp from earlier drizzle, her hands clenched around a fraying stuffed rabbit. Her eyes, too old for her age, scanned him. Not judging. Just, waiting. "We're ready," she whispered. "The judge is asking." Charles straightened his tie with hands that shook slightly. His lawyer had warned him this might happen, that the girls might be asked to speak for themselves. No script. No preparation. Just truth. But he hadn't expected this truth. Not the part where the uncle, clean-shaven and well-dressed, sat behind his desk with that photo of the girls' burned childhood toys. Not the revelation that the adoption papers he'd hastily signed were being challenged as emotional coercion. Not even the anonymous letters that had started arriving last week. "You bought them. You don't deserve them." He had torn them up. Every one. But the words still clung to the corners of his mind like mold he couldn't scrub away. The courtroom had no color. Just polished oak and the distant echo of footsteps. The 4 girls walked in together, uncoached, unprompted, and eerily synchronized like they always were, as if they were born sharing one heart. Emma led them, her shoulders squared like a soldier in miniature. Olivia clutched a notebook filled with crayon drawings. Sophia counted the steps silently as she walked. Ava, always last, carried the old rabbit she never let go. Charles followed behind them like a ghost unsure if he belonged in the scene. The judge looked at them with an unreadable expression. "Girls, would you prefer to speak together?" A beat of silence. Then Emma nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The testimony came in pieces. A whispered memory of a locked closet. A breath about hunger. A single, sharp sentence that made Charles freeze: "He told us if we cried, no dinner." Sophia, her fingers twitching with the urge to count something, had turned her eyes to the ceiling. Olivia said nothing at all. She just slid one of her drawings across the table. 4 stick figures in white dresses. One man holding money. Another man holding a check. And 4 tiny hearts floating toward him. Charles stared. It was him. His coat, his eyes, even the small scar above his right eyebrow from a bike accident at age 11. The drawing captured a moment that hadn't happened, at least not yet, the girls smiling. The judge looked up. "Mr. Wagner. You have anything to add before I rule?" Charles hesitated. The room, so cold before, now felt thick with heat. His tongue felt like sandpaper. All those boardrooms, pitches, and billion-dollar acquisitions, and yet he couldn't find the words to explain what these children meant to him. "I didn't plan this," he said at last. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to be a father. I was just a man who lost too much too fast. My wife, she told me before she passed, if your heart ever starts beating again, don't ignore it." He looked at the girls. "It started beating again the night I saw them." He hesitated. Then walked to his briefcase and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "They wrote me a contract 2 weeks ago," he said, unfolding it with gentle fingers. "Crayon and glitter. It says I can't yell. I have to learn how to braid hair. I must make pancakes every Sunday. And, they get to call me Dad if they want to." The judge took the paper, brows furrowed, lips twitching with something dangerously close to a smile. Then silence. Long, heavy. Until Ava stepped forward. She didn't speak. She just walked across the courtroom, dragging the rabbit by one ear, and wrapped her arms around Charles's leg. "Please don't send us back," she whispered. Charles closed his eyes. Somewhere outside, the storm began to fade. The judge tapped her gavel gently. "I will consider all testimony and reconvene tomorrow for a final ruling." Charles exhaled, finally letting his body sag with a day's worth of tension. The girls clustered around him. He looked down at them, not as a CEO, not as a man with wealth or legacy. Just as someone trying to heal. "Come on," he said, voice hoarse. "Let's go home." As they stepped out into the rain-soaked street, a woman stood across the plaza, watching. Silver hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She held a closed umbrella, though the sky was still weeping. Dr. Eleanor Reed didn't wave. She simply nodded. Like someone who knew this was just the beginning. 3 months earlier, Charles Wagner had stood in the corner of a grand ballroom, half hidden behind a curtain of orchids, wondering how soon he could slip out without being noticed. The charity gala was in full swing, crystal chandeliers humming, flutes of champagne shimmering in candlelight, laughter echoing like rehearsed lines in a tired play. A banner above the dance floor read the Rebecca Wagner Foundation for Children of Trauma. His name. Her name. Their legacy. But none of it felt real. Not anymore. He hadn't touched his drink. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of obligatory words. He was just passing time. Dressed in grief. Moving through life like a polished ghost. Until he heard the words that shattered the stillness in his chest, "50,000 is my final offer." The voice came from a side hallway, near the loading dock, too close, too careless. Curious, Charles wandered closer, drawn by a chill he couldn't name. "They're damaged goods anyway," the voice added, thick with disdain. "Worth half that, to be honest." Charles paused. Then moved toward the slightly ajar door like someone in a dream. On the other side of the frame, 4 little girls. Identical. Standing like paper dolls in worn white dresses. Blonde hair messy but combed with care. Tiny hands clutching stuffed rabbits. 4 pairs of blue eyes filled with something too old for 5-year-olds to carry, fear, resignation, and silence practiced too many times. The man speaking to a potential buyer was lean, well-dressed, and wearing a forced smirk. His features vaguely mirrored the girls'. Charles would later learn he was their uncle, Martin Foster. And in that moment, something ancient cracked inside him. Something sharp. Something primal. "Let me examine the goods," the other man said. "I want to make sure they match." Charles didn't remember moving. Only the sound of his voice, low, firm, unfamiliar. "That's enough." The 2 men turned, startled. Martin tried to laugh it off. "Sir, this is private," but Charles didn't wait. He stepped forward, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote a number that made both men blink. "Not for what," he said, voice flat. "For whom?" He walked to the girls slowly, lowering himself to their eye level. He didn't speak. Just looked. And it was Emma who stared back, unflinching, daring him to flinch first. He didn't. Instead, he said the first honest words he'd spoken in months. "I can't promise to be perfect. But I won't leave you." Her eyes narrowed. Studying. Measuring. Behind him, Martin sputtered. "This is absurd." "Are you even legally allowed?" Charles pulled out his phone. "Say one more word and I call the police." Martin hesitated. Greed and fear warring on his face. "Cash would be better," he mumbled. "The check or the cops," Charles replied. His tone made the choice obvious. The deal was made in scribbled ink. A woman appeared moments later, calm, composed, silver-haired. She handed Charles a card. "Dr. Eleanor Reed, Child Psychology and Crisis Intervention." "I can help with the logistics," she said. "But they need more than legal papers. They need someone who won't disappear." Charles didn't ask how she knew to be there. He was too busy looking at the four girls now huddled together in the back seat of his Bentley, their faces blank, their rabbits held like shields. On the drive back to his estate, no one spoke. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, opened the door and blinked. "Sir." Charles cleared his throat. "We'll need rooms. 4. Together, maybe. Just for tonight." The girls refused to separate. So he let them sleep in one room, on one oversized bed, like a human not of limbs and trust worn thin. That night, he sat outside the door and listened. Tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Then silence. Then a response. Tap tap. Tap. They were communicating, some kind of code through the wall. A secret language born from necessity. From fear. From survival. Charles didn't sleep. The next morning, he burned the toast. Twice. The girls didn't complain. Emma just scraped the charred parts and split it evenly. "Do you like eggs?" he asked. Four tiny heads nodded. Later that day, a delivery truck arrived, boxes of clothes, shoes, children's books, hair accessories. No one had ordered them. But a note sat on top, written in looping cursive, "Children need consistency more than luxury. Here's a start." The signature matched Dr. Reed's card. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Charles stared at his phone. His CFO had texted about an urgent deal in Kuala Lumpur. He typed 2 words back, "Not now." Then deleted them. Instead, he wrote something he never expected to say, "Cancel everything." He looked down the hall toward the guest room, where 4 little girls had huddled in borrowed pajamas, holding hands even in sleep. He didn't know what he was doing. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try. Not for Rebecca. Not for redemption. For them. The storm hit on a Sunday. A wall of white slammed into the mansion, rattling the windows and snapping tree limbs like toothpicks. The power died just before nightfall, plunging the sprawling estate into an eerie hush. Charles lit candles, wrapped the girls in thick blankets, and built a makeshift camp around the fireplace. He told stories. Made s'mores for the first time in his life. They laughed when he burned the marshmallows, giggled when he tried to braid Ava's hair and gave up after one lopsided strand. For a while, it felt almost normal. Until Olivia started coughing. A small sound at first, then ragged, sharp. When he touched her forehead, his heart sank, burning hot. Fever. No medicine. No way to call anyone. Roads blocked. The closest ER nearly an hour away in this weather. But Charles didn't hesitate. He bundled them up, strapped the girls into his SUV, and drove into the blizzard like a man with everything to lose. At the hospital, as nurses surrounded Olivia, one turned to Charles and asked, "Are you the grandfather?" He froze. Ava's voice cut through the room, "He's our dad now." He looked down at her, stunned. She didn't blink. Didn't take it back. Emma, Sophia, and Ava nodded as one. For a second, the noise of the ER blurred into something distant. A clarity settled into his bones. He wasn't just protecting them anymore. He belonged to them. But the real shock came days later, after Olivia was safe and they'd returned to the mansion, after laughter had returned in flickers. The letter arrived with no return address. Short. Clean. "How much did you pay for them, Wagner? Wonder what the authorities would think." Another came the next day. Then a third. Dr. Reed arrived just after the fourth. He handed her the notes. She didn't flinch. "He's watching us," Charles said. "I should have known it wouldn't be over." She sat, composed, her silver bracelet glinting faintly in the kitchen light. "Martin Foster won't go away quietly. He wants more money. Or leverage. He sold them." Charles's voice shook. "He threatened them. And now he wants to paint me as a criminal." "Technically," she replied, "the paperwork from that night could be seen as irregular." "Irregular," he echoed, heat rising. "He put them on display like merchandise." "I know," she said gently. "That's why I helped you file for emergency guardianship the next day." He looked at her hard. "Why were you even there that night?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I needed someone like you to see what others refused to." "You orchestrated it." "I created an opportunity," she replied. "You chose to act." He stared at her, unsure whether to thank her or demand answers she still wasn't giving. That night, he barely slept. Images haunted him, Emma shielding her sisters, Olivia's fevered eyes, Ava's tiny fingers slipping into his hand. And now, the threat of losing them. Again. In the morning, he called his lawyer. "Prepare for a custody hearing," he said. "And find everything you can about Martin Foster." Days passed. The girls returned to their routines, school, art, numbers, books. But something changed. They stuck even closer to him. Emma asked to sleep with the lights on. Sophia stopped counting aloud. One night, Charles found Ava curled up in his armchair. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. Then whispered, "What if he takes us back?" He knelt beside her. "No one's taking you anywhere." "He said we weren't worth keeping," she murmured. "Said Mommy and Daddy left because we cried too much." Charles's heart cracked. "That's not true," he said fiercely. "They loved you more than anything. Then why didn't they come back?" The question hung like smoke. He swallowed hard. They couldn't. But they would have if they could. She nodded, half believing. Then reached inside her rabbit and pulled out a photo, creased, nearly torn. 4 babies, identical. A man and woman smiling. "Can you keep it safe?" she asked. "Will he burn it if he finds it?" Charles took the photo carefully, as if it were glass. "No one will ever touch this. I promise." The next morning, he stood in front of the hallway closet and smashed the lock with a sledgehammer. One swing. Wood cracked. The girls gasped. "In this house," he declared, breathless, "nothing will ever be locked again." Sophia cried silently. Not fear, release. That night, as he tucked them in, he whispered, "I had nightmares too. About Rebecca. About missing my chance to say goodbye." The room was quiet. Then Olivia, eyes wide and solemn, asked, "Did she go to heaven too?" "Yes," he said gently. "She was very brave." Emma reached for his hand. "So are you." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, silent. But inside, something shifted. Walls came down. One by one. And as Charles stood in the hallway, looking at 4 sleeping faces, he knew he'd been wrong about one thing. He hadn't saved them. They were saving him. The day of the final hearing arrived like the slow unfolding of spring after a brutal winter. Sunlight spilled over the courthouse steps, soft and golden, as if the world itself had decided to pause and hold its breath. Charles adjusted the collars of 4 tiny coats, kneeling to check each button like a ritual. "Remember," he said gently, "just answer what the judge asks. Nothing more." Emma looked up at him, face calm but her hand gripping his coat pocket tightly. "We know, Dad." The word still made something inside him ache. Not from pain. From the miracle of being chosen. Inside, Judge Wilson waited, her gavel resting beside a steaming cup of tea. Martin Foster sat across the room, back straight, jaw clenched, eyes glinting with feigned remorse. His lawyer spoke first, spinning fiction into polished arguments. "Mr. Foster regrets past mistakes, but he is the girl's blood relative. The adoption was rushed, fueled by Mr. Wagner's emotional vulnerability and excessive wealth. It was, at best, a manipulation." Charles didn't flinch. His attorney responded methodically, presenting documentation, school records, therapy reports. But none of it mattered, not really, until Judge Wilson asked to speak with the girls alone. They filed into her chambers like they always did, shoulder to shoulder, hearts linked. Charles stood in the hallway, trying not to imagine the questions they were being asked. 20 minutes later, they returned. Emma walked ahead, eyes steady, then reached for his hand. "We told her the truth," she said. "All of it." The court reconvened. Judge Wilson's voice was firm. There were, undoubtedly, procedural irregularities in how these girls came to live with Mr. Wagner. But there is no irregularity in love. And love, she added softly, is evident in every word, every glance, every action from this man. Martin Foster's protest was cut short. "This court grants full legal custody and adoption rights to Charles Henry Wagner," the judge said. "Effective immediately." The gavel fell. Ava let out a small sound, half gasp, half sob, and buried her face into Charles's coat. Sophia clutched his hand so tightly he thought his bones might bruise. Olivia smiled, the soft kind that stretched slowly across her whole face. But Emma simply whispered, "We're safe now." Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered. One thrust a mic forward. "Mr. Wagner, what makes you qualified to raise 4 children?" Charles opened his mouth, but Sophia answered first. "He stayed." That night, the mansion glowed. The girls danced through the hallways in their socks, laughing. Rebecca's photo now hung between their baby pictures on the wall, one family, woven from broken threads. In the garden, the cherry trees had begun to bloom, pale pink blossoms opening like tiny hearts. Charles watched as the girls circled them, tying ribbons around each trunk. "One for Mommy. One for Daddy. One for Rebecca," Ava said. "And one for us." Charles nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 4 lockets, silver, delicate, each engraved with an initial. Inside each, one photo of their birth parents, one of Rebecca, and one of the 6 of them, smiling in the garden. "So you'll always know where you came from," he said, fastening each necklace carefully, "and who you belong to now." Later, as moonlight settled over the house, he peeked into each bedroom. Sophia was already asleep, her fingers wrapped around her locket. Olivia had drawn cherry trees on her wall in soft crayon pastels. Ava mumbled something in her sleep, his name, he thought. And Emma, eyes half closed, whispered as he pulled the blanket over her, "You kept your promise." He kissed her forehead. "So did you." Outside, the wind was quiet. No storms. No locks. No shadows left in the corners. Just one man. 4 girls. And a home built not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by love that refused to be negotiated. And somewhere beyond the branches of the blooming trees, Charles imagined Rebecca smiling, watching not with sorrow, but peace.